Okay, after this introduction, last week, overview of the module and general organizational things. Today I want to talk about this, the legal framework that we're operating in, and in particular the national curriculum, as this describes roughly what schools should teach, what teachers should teach. And as you'll see, there's a few things around that also have an influence on how schools teach and how you as maybe prospective teachers would teach, but they also have an influence on our activities as a university for outreach. There's a few things to cover. It's not a ton of things, but still, I decided I wanted to say more about diversity, inclusion, and how that, in particular in computer science, becomes relevant. But I found I can't really do this justice at the end of this session, so maybe we'll come back to that. And here I'll just pick out one aspect of that. But other than that, we'll go top down. We'll look a bit at the school system in the UK. For most of you, this will be fine, and you know this. But I want to just wrap up the main points. And maybe some things have changed since you left school. For example, the GCSE marks. And then we'll look specifically at computer science, and then within computer science at key stage 3, because that's the target group for us. Okay, I will probably keep saying the UK education system because that's for short, but I should really say the English one, because what I'll say will be true for England and to some degree for Wales, but to a lesser degree for Scotland, Northern Ireland. But yeah, let's go by the majority of people. So here's a big overview. You start school roughly at age 4. The school year you turn 5. You start the compulsory education stage. Many kids go to some preschool before that, but that is voluntarily. Then you start in reception class, and you spend this year and 6 more in your primary school. And well, this is key stage 0, I think, is it's not an official thing, but it would be a key stage 0 if there was one. The national curriculum really starts with key stage 1, the first 2 years, and then key stage 2, and it goes up to key stage 4, the end of secondary school. For A-levels, there are some documents as well describing what should be taught, but I understand they're not as strict, or schools have somewhat more flexibility on those. The other big thing, there are more or less important exams at the end of the school forms, the SATs at the end of primary school, but more importantly, the GCSEs at the end of secondary school. And of course, A-levels if you continue into 6th form. What else should I say? This is the usual way of state-funded schools in England. There are many, many exceptions. Private schools often have slightly different boundaries. Some schools move the year 9 into key stage 4, so they start a bit earlier. And that also means that in some schools, you have to decide your GCSE subjects already for year 9, so in year 8. You hardly see this little cursor, right? That's better, yeah. I think that's all I want to say about this. So usually your A-level marks determine what university you can go to. Your GCSE marks might determine which A-levels you can take, but this is probably all something that's closer to you still, and so you will remember this. One remark at this point is, if you're in key stage 3, you might not think about what university course you might eventually want to take, or whether you go to university at all. That's still far down the line. That's just something to keep in mind when we design activities. This is still far on the horizon. Okay, I want to say a few more things about the GCSEs. So we've seen they're at the end of year 11. They used to have these grades that go up to A star, but this is the thing, I don't know if you know this, it's been changed again, so now we have numbers. The highest is 9, which is essentially like A star, but they try to make it a little stricter, so leave more gap at the top of the range. And this plot is intended to show you why this is what you want. You see the top marks are at the bottom, and you see this graph is essentially drifting up. That's what people call grade inflation. In general, there's more people getting the higher marks. And one solution for this is once in a while you just start a new grade that's better than all the previous ones. That's what happened with A star. And in a sense, the 9 is a little bit like that. Another attempt to work against this shift upwards. Yep.
Isn't that a bit of a shift downwards from 2010 to 2015?
Yeah, so the question was if there isn't a shift downwards from 2010, and that's true. There were some reforms around that time. They were slightly later. I don't know if this can explain this. I would say it's roughly straight, but for the green one, for B's, there was a slight downdrift if you zoom in enough. You're right. Yeah, that's interesting. One could try to find out what happened 2011. Maybe people were concerned and tried to be stricter in the marking. Yeah, it's not clear. It's kept fairly stable after that, but I think the desire to distinguish a bit further was still there. Yeah. Okay, I've heard people typically take 9 subjects for GCSEs, but this is just a number I've taken from the web. I don't know. The span seems to be much bigger. Some go crazy and others take much fewer. And for many jobs, you need something like 5 good passes. But probably for universities, you want to go better than that. But, well. So far, so good. Any comments on GCSEs? Yeah, I think for next slide, this is a bit about the subjects. You have a lot of choice, but some things are pre-described. As I said before, most schools choose during their year 9 what they take for GCSE so that they can start these in year 10 and 11. And some schools do it a year early. You will always have to take maths, English, and science in some form, but you have some choice of how science looks like in detail. And then a typical mix is take some of the other subjects, a combination of these. And in particular, you can take a technical subject. This is where computer science fits in. And then you make your mix from that. So computer science is a core subject, which means you have to take it till the end of your secondary school time, till the end of Key Stage 4. But you don't have to take it as a GCSE subject. All right? So you will still have a class on computing, but I guess the motivation for these subjects where you don't take the GCSEs is slightly different than for those where you have this high stakes exam at the end. So even though you have this continuation of computing, I would imagine it makes a big difference from the mindset whether or not you take it for GCSEs or not. And there are also additional lessons as far as I know. I'd like you to jump over to Slido now. We'll come back to the survey for the pre-session activity. But I don't know if you've looked this up or not. Let's have a guess how many students take computing as GCSE subject.
What's the slide before?
It's the same as last time. So if you go sli.do/comp335. Okay, I can see a wide range of numbers. And of course, you don't want to Google this now. Don't spoil the fun. £8? All right. Is everyone happy with their number? There's one shortcoming of Slido. It doesn't have a question type number, so it doesn't show averages or something. This is just text. But if I would have to say the average from this, maybe something like 15 or so, or 20. And that's not too far off. The answer you have to dig out from this graph. I didn't put the percentage there. And I put in lots of other subjects. So let's try to decipher this a bit. First of all, I put in maps because it's compulsory. This should be the number of students really taking it. I don't know what happened in this year. There's something weird going on because there's not a dip in all the other subjects. So I don't know, maybe we have to ignore 2013, something like this. And then the subjects are sorted as they are in numbers this year. And you can see computer science here is this little triangle. I think it was roughly 10%. It was something like 77,000 exams in computing out of maybe 500,000 in total, something like this, a bit more. Well, obviously substantially more, 700,000 according to that. Yeah.
I suppose it's not a coincidence that IT's gone down as computing's gone up.
That's not a coincidence because IT doesn't exist anymore past this state. So in a sense, in 2014, IT was decided to be phased out and replaced by computing, but there was some time, like you can't say, next year, teachers, please start teaching this new subject from now. And also, like, there's classes who already started, of course. So there was some time where, for some time, the two subjects existed next to each other, and this is obviously, computing had to be rolled out in the schools. So we have to ignore the first parts. And essentially, you can ignore IT, but I still wanted to put it there because it shows IT used to be at much higher levels than computing is now. And allegedly, the perception is that computing is harder than IT was, so fewer take it. Of course, that's it's an understandable reason, but it's also very unfortunate. And I also like that computing is, the relevance of computing in a sense is between learning German and Spanish. So Spanish is more important. German's less important. I kind of get that. There's many people speaking Spanish, no doubt, but there's a lot of more people using computers. So maybe we want to change that number a bit. It's also, you should compare it to the sciences, the traditional sciences. I mean, they're basically all on the same level, which is probably because you can't separately just pick and choose. So this red, green, this is biology, chemistry, and physics is just on top of each other. And that's easily twice as much as computing. Okay, so just for context, if we like this or whatever that means, but that's the fact. Okay, we've seen a little bit what the system generally is. Now let's look a little bit closer at what teaching computing means and what's behind this term in school. And for that, let's start with the pre-session task that you filled out. I wonder if I can show the results. I probably have to switch here. The definition of computer science, this was basically just reading from the slides, but just to recap, Simon Peyton-Jones defined computer science as the study of information, computation, and communication in natural and artificial systems. I think it's interesting that he puts information first and tries to explain that first as well. Because if you think about computer science, probably computation or even the devices are more in foreground, but he puts information first. many good reasons for teaching computing. I think he lists mainly two. Paraphrasing, give students the ability to understand what's happening around them. And if the world around them uses computers, they probably should understand something about them. And the second reason is jobs. Find a job after they leave school. Okay, how many myths? That depends a bit where you stop the talk as well. There's more myths coming up. I think it was 3 according to that bar. And okay, this is the interesting part. I don't know, do you feel like explaining your answer a bit now, just to the group, or shall we leave it with that? We can come back to all these examples for our lessons, because I think these are good examples to base a lesson around. So we can also just keep them for the record. So finite state machines, some abstraction that doesn't really relate to technology directly, but is used in lots of technology indirectly, especially if you use regular expressions, right? And sorting algorithms, as we've seen the example in the talk. Yeah, that was the prime example that he showed. And yeah, the traveling salesperson problem. I mean, specifically, he's talking about abstract algorithms and about the complexity theory behind it. So this is one thing that's special in computer science that I always like to point this out. In comparison to engineering disciplines, computer science has this feature that we can prove lower bounds. We have abstract models of what happens in reality. Now, physicists have that too, or engineers have that too. But usually their models are either so complicated, so detailed that they can't really prove anything mathematically about them, or they're abstracting quite a bit from reality. And then it's you can show something in them, like my example always is preservation of energy is a lower bound from physics. You cannot build an engine, a machine that beats that lower bound in a sense. You cannot have higher efficiency than what preservation of energy tells you is possible. But also, this lower bound is not really interesting. You can't even get close to it. In computer science, we can prove lower bounds in some models that we can achieve, or at least achieve up to constant factors in the running time, things like that. And that's a big difference. So we're lucky that our machines are closer to the abstract models we can study, and we have better tools for the abstract models, and they are much closer in total. And complexity theory is one such lower bound technique. You can show that no algorithm, well, at least very unlikely, no algorithm solves this problem in polynomial time. And for the traveling salesperson problem, that means if you have a few thousand cities, you won't be solving this in your lifespan if you use an exact algorithm, a brute force method. Cybersecurity, yeah. And the sorting algorithms again. All right. Anything you want to add? I wanted to point out a few terms that are a bit confusing, easy to mix up, and I think also are not universally agreed upon whether you use them exactly in this way or in a slightly different meaning. But I would at least for this module want to fix them. And this is following like they're used in the talk and like they're used in this. There's a PDF available online. It's linked later. It's called the Computing at School Guide for, well, there's one for primary and one for secondary education. So computing is the entire subject, and that comprises different things. It's what's mentioned in the national curriculum as the subject name, the official title. It can, in a sense, be said to comprise of these three things: computer science, information technology, and digital literacy. I think these three fields, they come up in the talk, but not as prominently. They're explained in more detail in this guide. So I took the following definitions from there as well. Computer science is similar to the definition from Simon. It's a scientific and practical study of computation. So here the focus is on computation. I think the information can be counted towards that as well. And communication a little bit, as long as it's not the technical side. So this is, in a sense, the theoretical part. Whereas information technology is how computers and the equipment around that work. So in a sense, it's the hardware side, but it's also the part of building creative projects with computing methods, or using them in some specific way. And they count way to store data, etc., also as part of information technology. I think these two are somewhat overlapping at some points. Like data structures are also about how to store certain data, but they're also theoretical algorithms. And the last is a bit more separate. That's digital literacy. I'm looking for, there's a synonym that I wanted to put on the slide. It's described here as essentially using technology in a responsible way. It's separate from computer science in a sense. Maybe you can teach digital literacy without learning about computer science. But it's probably a bad idea to teach computer science without talking about digital literacy. But this is more interdisciplinary. It's not restricted to computer science. You can also talk about the ethics or the implications of technology in other subjects. But it's counted as part of computing in this framework. All right. I wanted to ask you about your school experience. So again, on Slido, I put some more distinctions in than just these. In particular, the ones that very, very far back were often used. There was a time when teaching computer science in school was synonymous with using Microsoft Office. These times are past, I hope. But I wanted to put that separate. Yeah. And of course, I'd be interested to hear what the more is. Slido doesn't have a text field where you can put this on top of this, but maybe you can just tell me. So it's good that you learned about this. Digital tools are useful. And information technology, I mean, in the sense it was defined on the slide, is also useful. But only some of you did programming in school, right? Did the others have some computing subjects? I guess you had, or no? Okay. So those that did programming also did algorithms, I guess. I don't know. It's just the same number, no total, but yeah, I guess the ethics and implications, that's often something that teachers like to cover also from other subjects. So it's something that's easy to cover even if you don't have specific computing courses. And yeah, digital literacy and ethics is kind of related. It's often discussed together. Would someone, does the number one here want to tell what more was?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's including any of the other category of that list, stuff like networking hardware. That's something that I remember.
Okay. Yeah, if it's specific networking hardware, maybe this is a bit beyond. I would say information technology is the right category, but it might go a bit further than that. I mean, we definitely didn't talk in school about how switches and routers work. Yep. Yeah, that's cool. So you see there's quite some variety, and only half of the class basically went through the curriculum as it's now described or prescribed. And I think if you just start counting, 2014 was it officially introduced, but then it took a few years before it really started. Even if it had started right the first day, we still don't have the students coming out of this entering universities. So we don't know, it's all still an open experiment, how effective this will have been in the end. One good outcome would be that we get students coming out of schools in universities that are well equipped for studying computer science, and maybe we get more students who want to do computer science, but we don't know yet. It's kind of not clear how well it will have worked. Still second future. All right. And this is actually it. That is the national curriculum in computing. I wanted to put this on the slide just to make the point that it fits on the slide. And you can probably just see the headlines should be readable for you. This is not just one key stage, it's all of computing that you have up to A levels. And there's even some like, my point is it's not a lot. It's very condensed, okay? Who has had a look at this before, at one of the national curriculum documents ever? I mean, they're mostly for teachers, why would you? But yeah, if you're thinking about becoming a teacher, maybe it's worth having a look. I don't know, we can zoom in a bit. I think the overall aims is something that Simon mentioned in his talk, that he's fairly proud of the formulation here. Apply the fundamental principles and concepts of computer science. And he lists specifically abstraction, logic, algorithms, data representation, and some of the other points. And then this is a bit spelled out and detailed for the different key stages. It's similar topics that come up several times, but of course they get substantially more technical and deeper the further you go. And you see the biggest part actually is about key stage 3. I don't want to discuss this in much detail because we'll talk about it from the perspective of the other document. It's also very, very condensed, so it's even for computer scientists, I think sometimes not 100% clear what is meant. But you can pick out some examples, like key stage 3, you're talking about Boolean logic, and something in circuits and programming, and how numbers can be represented in binary. So it goes hand in hand with, why do we do Boolean logic? Well, we want to teach how computers can compute. How do they compute with numbers? Well, they fiddle around with the binary representation. So that's one of the topics, and we'll see some of the others in more detail later. Okay. So feel free to look at this in more detail, but you will see it's quite abstract. There's quite a way to go from reading this document and designing your lesson when you step into class year 9 or 8 and decide what you're going to do today. And so another thing that's fairly interesting and not so typical, I guess, there was a grassroots, the Computing at School mostly, and other organizations were involved in drafting a curriculum for the teachers that they can roll out. But there's no official one. There's just several ones that are suggestions, and they follow the national curriculum, but they do the details in different ways. I think there's mainly 2 now. This first one is very new. I think it was just finished last year or something. So that's done together with the Raspberry Pi Foundation. They made a new attempt of spelling out all the lessons for all of the curriculum. And there's a an older one, which is not quite as detailed, from Computing at School. That's the other link. That's what we'll base the topic list on. But yeah, they're similar. And here's a nice graphic where you see how all the topics listed. But again, very condensed. Not for now. I think we spent too much time on rebooting laptops. So let me move on to Key Stage 3. So maybe you have a slightly better understanding what computing in school now looks like. We have these three big areas: computer science, information technology, digital literacy. And then orthogonal to that, lots of topics at different levels of detail in the different key stages. I've said this before, Key Stage 3 is particularly important for us as an outreach target because it's where the GCSE subjects are chosen. So that sets the route for the future of kids. But also it's where the first time they do real programming, in the sense of not clicking things together in Scratch, but writing programs in a textual programming language. And they go to some depth with that. So in principle, going by the curriculum, if we invite year 8 or year 9 to campus, you can rely on them having seen some Python programming, and they're in principle able to do that. How much of that has stuck with each individual kid will be a different story. And yeah, we want to get this further up. Here are the topics that are done in Key Stage 3. And again, so there's some programming, usually in Python, even though that's not compulsory. They do quite some data structures, the basic things that you can use in Python. I don't think dictionaries are covered, but okay, that's details. They usually know about searching, binary search, and some simple sorting algorithms. They will have seen Boolean logic, or will see it over the course of Key Stage 3. And they will talk a bit about hardware. So it's a fairly broad cut through computer science. You could say it's even a small part of computer science degrees. But of course, not always going as deep as you would at uni. So these are the topics that you can tie your lesson into. It's good if you pick something from that list, but then take it into a slightly different direction than what kids would have seen in school. So my, I don't know why that happened. One reason why I'm showing you all these material for teachers is so that you can look into the curricula and see what usually the schools already do, so that you don't duplicate that in your lesson. But you can still tie into that so that what you do on top of that has some connection to what the kids already know and have seen.
A quick question.
Yep.
Will the kids almost have definitely done those two curricula, one of those two curricula, or is there a chance that
I see. So yeah, the two curricula you're referring to, I guess, are these that I've shown before. This is the same links, just the Key Stage 3 part. Yeah, the question was, can we rely on them having done either of those? I guess the answer is no, you cannot rely on it really, because the national curriculum is compulsory for the state-funded schools, but the actual implementation is up to the teachers. And in particular, this one, the Teach Computing curriculum, is fairly new, so this might not be as widespread yet. This one, I would bet many teachers kind of take inspiration from that, because why would you reinvent the wheel? But they might have chosen to go some slightly different route. I think also this is Key Stage 3 is these 3 years. So in what order you do which of the topics, I think is not prescribed. So that's another challenge. We don't pick kids at the end of Key Stage 3, but somehow towards the end, but in the middle of the last year. So some of the things will not have been covered yet. Yeah, that's a bit of a challenge. You can't really rely on much. Yeah. Okay, another resource I want to point out because it's useful for you to get a quick overview what they might have seen is this this part of BBC Bite Size. It's intended as revision for students before they take their exams, but it's also just a nice list of topics condensed to little questions. And yeah, here's the link for Key Stage 3 in computing. Okay, so this is a bit of a dry lesson today because there's all this background that I think I want to get to you, but none of it is directly leading into your assessments. It's just all hovering in the background. One last thing from this list is widening participation. Who has heard the term before? Apart from me. Okay, good. I'd like to have this term understood in a slightly broader sense. In the university context, it is usually understood as widening participation postcodes. I'll come to that in a second. The big idea is to get students from misrepresented, less represented backgrounds into universities. Try to do as much as you can to encourage that. It's a key area for the Russell Group and probably most universities. And the Taster Days are officially also part of that initiative on the department level. We have a uni-wide team, specifically separate from the departments or orthogonal to that structure, who is specifically doing events for that. So here's their website, and well, you can read their aims. The specific understanding that widening participation in this context usually takes is summarized in this picture, but I should explain you what that shows. The data for this is fairly old. I think it's 2013-14. So what's done for this picture is you take a certain area, a postcode, and you determine how many people are age 18 and how many of those are in higher education or in some form of higher education. I don't know the exact cutoff, what is counted or what is not. Universities definitely counted. And then you take the percentage. How many are in higher education of the age where they could be in higher education if they went through the standard curriculum? And you divide this into quintiles for each postcode. So quintile 1 that's the lowest 20% of all postcodes, the lowest percentage that continues into higher education. And well, the next 20% and so up, and quintile 5 is the largest 20% of postcode areas. So if you're in the dark areas, that just means if you're a random student in that area, you're much more likely to be in higher education at the appropriate age. Does that make sense? So this is just data that is easy to get because postcodes exist. This doesn't look at any other kind of criteria. So that's the sense in which widening participation is a bit restricted. Often the term is a bit restricted to this specific sense. Socioeconomic background is usually correlated with postcode, and so you get the influence of socioeconomic background. But of course, there's more. What's quite obvious from this picture is Liverpool, the whole area, same on the other side of the Mersey in Birkenhead, is mostly quintile 1 and 2. So there's fairly low participation rates in higher education, despite lots of universities or higher education providers in the area. And so you will see this in the schools that we invite. There's a huge variety in diversity. Some of the kids will have fixed plans of going to this and that university, and others will not really have considered the thought at all. So that's the challenge. We want to present university as an achievable goal for them, but without lying to them. They will need certain marks to get into their programs, etc. So you will want to be honest without being elitist. Sounds great. Is easier said than done. On the positive side, you have a great opportunity because you can really make a big impact. If someone hasn't really thought about university at all before, and you can convince them that this is a possibility that can have a huge impact on their lives. And so just some parting thoughts from this session. The purpose of the taster days is on the one side a bit to support the teachers, but that support is less and less needed because more and more high quality material is available for them to design lessons. And the second is from this widening participation agenda. We want to show that university life is not this elitist thing where everyone walks around with funny wardrobes, with funny garments, but our student body is already diverse and open, and we want to continue doing that, keeping it open, widening it further. Yeah, I've said that you will have to be prepared to have a wide range in the students, so you will want some lessons that can cater for that. Without dumping computer science down. I think we don't do anyone a favor with that. But the solutions to that in the abstract sense are, you want lessons that students can relate to. So you want to introduce something abstract by starting with something concrete, with an example, ideally from their experience and environment, something they already know, and then take it from there. Relevant goes further. It also means that the thing you teach makes a difference. It makes a difference for the students to know what you're teaching them. That can be understanding the world better, or building something, or many other things. But you will have to explicitly make that point. It's often an assumption you do something and they will just see or realize that this is great. It's better to make that explicit. And the last point, tying again to the diversity of the classes we invite, you want something achievable. So you want to deliver some success in the activities and tasks that you do. So you want to make something that there's guaranteed success, but also success on different levels to keep those challenged that are already further in their learning. I think that's all I want to say for this for now. This sounds like it's a tough call. And we'll look at how to do that a bit more in the next lessons, next two. There's some scaffolding available for doing that. And lots of creativity, opportunities for creativity from your side to make that happen.